everybody. Lovely to see you all here today. Come on in from the waiting room. Amazing. Hello. Welcome to today's very exciting PETA pre-conference webinar. My name is Cassie Tung. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at PETA, and I am very much looking forward to spending this session time with all of you. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from beautiful Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation in the area that we now call Sydney. I want to pay my respects to the land's elders, both past and present, and acknowledge the thousands of years, tens of thousands of years of community, connection, culture, and education that has taken place on this country and on all lands across Australia. What a privilege it is to live on lands with such a vital heritage and ongoing legacy, and to come together and to continue to talk about how we can best educate the younger generations together. It's a real privilege. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. A quick moment of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, so we ask that you remain on mute, both so that everyone can hear our amazing speaker now and so that they can hear her later on the recording. However, we of course would still love to hear from you. So if you have any questions or comments that you might have as we go on, you can drop them into the chat box below at any time, and I'll make sure that your questions are shared and heard. Finally, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our guest for today, Dr. Bree Hurn, who we're thrilled to have both on this webinar and as a speaker at the PETA 2023 Annual Leading with Literacy Conference next month. Bree is an experienced primary teacher, literacy leader, and education writer. She has researched the ways in which teachers' knowledge about language impacts their self-efficacy and pedagogical decisions in literacy teaching. She also has a special interest in the potential effects of professional learning for enhancing teacher knowledge and subsequent practice. She has been a lecturer in language and literacy at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education for the past 8 years and has worked on various early years literacy projects for, this is a huge list, the Melbourne Archdiocese of Catholic Schools, the Department of Education Victoria, the Department of Education South Australia, and Brisbane Catholic Education. Incredible. Bree delivers language and literacy professional learning to teachers and leaders in both the primary and secondary sectors, and works with parent groups on creating quality home literacy learning environments. Bree is also the course coordinator of the Master of Teaching Early Childhood and Primary at the University of Melbourne. She is very busy, so we are very lucky to have her here today. Welcome, Bree. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Cassie, for that warm welcome, and I'm delighted to be here with you all this afternoon. So I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. So I'm a Melbourneite. So I would like to acknowledge their lands that I am on, the traditional custodians. It's important that I pay my respect to elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and I extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians present here today. All right, so my title of this webinar, or this piece of work, is called Using a Full Heart to Plan the English Curriculum. Now, you might have thought that was, around love of literature and that sort of thing, and we will get to that, but I'm going to start at this very literal point of actual heart, so our actual heart in our chest. So we acknowledge that there are some people in our community who are born, unfortunately, with a congenital heart disease or a congenital heart problem, and they need expert medical intervention throughout their lives, on top of making their own mindful choices to protect their heart health in the best way that they can. For others who are fortunate enough to be born with a healthy heart, though, there are agreed practices for a baseline level of heart health. So they might be things like this. They might be, eating healthily to protect your heart, and there's a specific kind of protocol around a heart-friendly diet. There's advice around keeping your body mass index in a healthy range. There are protocols around managing and keeping cholesterol levels low. When we think about activity and exercise, there are certain cardiovascular guidelines around cardio versus strength training, avoiding cigarettes, and keeping up with your heart health checks with your doctor. So very, very agreed upon, very research informed tips around how to maintain your heart health. Now, that slide is overwhelming. It is deliberately overwhelming because I acknowledge that we all need to start somewhere. So if if you decided one day, okay, I'm really concerned about my heart health, and you looked at all of that information on the Australian, Heart Foundation website, you would likely be overwhelmed. So my advice to you, if I was your doctor, might be to pick a hero piece. So pick a keystone. So if we thought about that previous slide and all of those base level advice pieces that gave us, exercise was one. So I might start here, just for argument's sake in this analogy, I might make exercise my keystone piece. So I know, though, that by picking that keystone, it's going to have positive impacts on the other things. So healthy food is needed for exercise. Not smoking will make your exercise easier. Going to bed early and getting adequate rest will help you rise early enough to have enough energy to exercise. At the same time as exercise might help you feel tired enough at the end of the day to get a good sleep that night. To push that analogy even further, if you feel like you're struggling while you're exercising, there might be a reason to go and see your GP, who will help conduct a heart health check. Okay, so my acknowledgement of there's lots and lots of things that we need to be aware of for baseline heart health, but that to start somewhere, actually, one keystone habit like exercise will have a flow-on effect to all of the other ones. Okay. So we recognize this heart health analogy as teachers and leaders when we think of a classroom of children and their literacy learning. So this RTI here, the 3 tiers of support, might be familiar to some people. There's a similar body of work that you might know as the multi-tiered support system, the MTSS. Basically, if we're to look at that bottom tier, that's what we're talking about in terms of that baseline health. So the baseline health of your literacy classroom is at that bottom tier. We recognize this analogy because at the top of that tier would be the people that would be, if we're talking about heart health, unfortunate enough to be born with something, out of their control. So maybe a congenital heart disease. Some children, for a range of reasons, require intensive and individualized intervention at that top part of that triangle because of anything, from auditory processing. Maybe there's a language disorder there, maybe there's hearing loss, among other things. And you as teachers and leaders, would have a whole range of experience in that. So these things put those children at an identifiable, agreed risk of lower outcomes in their literacy learning. These children need support in addition to the core classroom instruction, or what we would call that bottom level, that red first wave, first response teaching for all. And in addition to that next level, which is the targeted, differentiated small group instruction. So therefore, if we look at that red level, and, we'll take the analogy of heart, the identifiable color of the heart being red, even further, we can think about in a language and literacy classroom all of those deliberate practices that must be in place to ensure as much as we can impact. So this is where my presentation is going to take place today. It's these core essential practices that we must have in place to ensure the best possible outcomes for all children. So some people might be familiar with this document here. So we're going to turn our focus away from the less scientific appropriation of the word heart, and we're going to now reflect on the love and the energy that children in our classrooms deserve in terms of their language and literacy learning, so that core. This document is out of America. It's come from the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators and their General Education Leadership Network. So they're called the Essential Instructional Practices in Early Literacy. The one I'm using today pertains to K to 3, so they're kindergarten to year 3, but it's part of a body of work because there is one for pre-kindergarten and there are essential instructional practices for the elementary grades as well. So this one fits in this, what we would understand in Australia to be lower primary, and is certainly synonymous with K to 3 in America. So I wonder, once I take you through these 10 essential practices that they believe are that core first response, first wave pedagogy of, of language and literacy, I'm wondering which ones strike a chord with you. These academics from Michigan agree on 10, and I'm aware that they would be similar to those employed by colleagues of ours here in Australia. And I know in the ACT, for example, they actually use this document to inform some of their instructional practice. So I'm going to take you through them, and I'm going to do that thing that's a bit annoying that people do. I'm going to read it and let you read it at the same time. I think that sort of message abundance is helpful here because I really want you to reflect upon, out of the 10, which 2 or 3 or 4 are really striking a chord for you. And then we can talk about, I wonder why that is. So the first one, in terms of these essential literacy practices, is that there's deliberate research-informed efforts to foster literacy motivation and engagement within and across lessons. So the idea is that there is, actual intentionality around getting children motivated and engaged within their literacy lessons. And another essential practice is read alouds of age-appropriate books and other materials that are both print and digital, and that include culturally relevant texts. The third one is small group and individual instruction. So we're talking whole class, but then we're also taking into account that there needs to be individual instruction as well as small group. This is interesting, using a variety of grouping strategies, most often with flexible groups formed and instruction targeted to children's observed and assessed needs in specific areas of literacy. So the idea is that the Wombat group aren't always the Wombat group, that it can be flexible because of what you've seen them do in some areas of their literacy and not other areas, and also based upon what it is that you want to teach them that day. These groups can be fluid within both reading and writing development, and therefore not always about their general ability or their general text level, for example. So that one is interesting and might be challenging for some people in our community. Another agreed essential practice is that there must be activities that build phonological awareness, and the focus there is in kindergarten and 1, which would be our kindergarten and prep. That there is explicit instruction in letter, sound, and sound-letter relationships. So we would understand that to be the alphabetic principle, and also that's where we would situate the explicit systematic teaching of phonics. This one, research and standards aligned writing instruction on a daily basis and across content areas in the school day. So this one's reminding us that writing is every single day, and we would say that opportunities for those very, very emergent writers, so our kinder children and our early primary children, might be more drawing and mark making, but that those opportunities are provided every day and across content areas, so that they are writing not just in 10 to 11, if that's when your classroom is organized to do writing, that it's across the day. Now, the final 4, intentional and ambitious efforts to build vocabulary and knowledge, including content and other cultural knowledge throughout the day. So the idea is that anytime you're teaching, you're very intentional around the new vocabulary teaching opportunities that there are, and that it is not just in the teaching of text in literacy or English time, that it would be across the school day. that there would be access to abundant reading material in classroom and school libraries and reading opportunities in the classroom. So we would see that as a varied reading diet, and we would see that as just as much opportunity for children to sustain in their own free and voluntary reading, as well as, you know, the use of different text types for the teaching of reading, so that there's an abundance of that. There's a reminder for ongoing observation and other forms of assessment of children's language and literacy development that informs their education. So we understand that is both formal and informal. We understand that that's formative and summative. And this idea of ongoing observation is that it is very much the bread and butter of our kinder teachers to engage in intentional observation of how our children are going in language and literacy to inform the next steps. And the final one is collaboration with families, caregivers, and the community in promoting literacy. So some resonate with me more than others, and I'm sure you're the same. So I wonder if you were to think about that now, which one or two or three speak most to your heart? Because to think about which one speaks most to your heart, it's worth reflecting on why that is. It's often because there's a gap you'd like to fill, or there's a problem that's stirring in you, in your teaching or your leadership of literacy. Or it could be something that really aligns with your passion, and therefore there's potential for greater depth or leadership in one or two of these essential practices. So this should be a familiar diagram to lots of people. This is our Australian curriculum organisation, and starting with the 3 strands. So we understand language, literature, and literacy as being the 3 strands which inform our Australian curriculum English. And even though these ideas are from the Australian curriculum, I'm hoping they'll be relevant whichever state-based version you're currently using, or perhaps in this time of change, transitioning towards. Now, the reason I start with this is because it doesn't talk about the act of literate practice. It doesn't talk about the modes yet, and that's deliberate. So in the language strand, we're talking about the language for interacting with others. It doesn't say orally or in writing. It just says language for interacting with others. In terms of language for expressing and developing ideas, again, that doesn't say whether that's oral or in a written text form. In terms of literature, the middle one, engaging with and responding to literature, obviously that's about reading, because literature comes to us in the written form or the digital form. But engaging with it and responding to can be done via listening, via speaking, via writing, and then maybe reading someone else's work. Creating literature then can be done, you know, with pencil and paper or orally. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we start with language, literature, and literacy before we even drill down into those modes, and that's very deliberate. So I'll just remind you then that teaching, learning, and assessment programs should balance and integrate these 3 strands. So this is a reminder from ACARA. The 3 strands support the development of knowledge, understanding, and skills, and that there is a hero piece. There is a keystone. So the focal point for a unit of work or a learning activity might arise from any one of those strands. But the intention is that units of work and activities draw on all 3 strands in ways that we understand that are integrated, but that we make clear the links to our children. And only then that we have this understanding do we drill down to the language modes. So we know that the processes of listening, speaking, reading, viewing, writing, and creating are interrelated, and that the learning of one supports and extends learning of the others. So content descriptions in each strand of the English curriculum incorporate listening, speaking, reading, viewing, and writing in an integrated and an interdependent way. And just another reminder from ACARA that learning contexts that address particular content descriptions will draw from more than one of these processes. So you can't do one thing without the other. For example, students will learn new vocabulary through their listening and through their reading. They apply their knowledge and their understanding in their speaking and in their writing and in their comprehension of both spoken and written texts. So this goes back to my analogy of, if you want to improve your cardiovascular health, you might start with exercise, but in fact, all of the other practices will be enhanced by your decision to focus on that. And that's the point I'm trying to make in this analogy with our English curriculum. So the good news is here, whichever strand you decide to use as your keystone, you really can't unscramble that egg. In my doctoral research, given the identified research problem I had of teachers' lack of confidence and therefore their avoidance of teaching grammar, which we know is situated in the language strand, I started there. So I started with my hero pieces language, but I intend to tell you a little more about that in my session in PETAA in October. But now, for purposes of today and today's webinar, I'm going to give you a lower primary example, and I am going to situate my work in the literature strand. So you might be familiar with this beautiful book, Our Dreaming. It was shortlisted this year in the Children's Book Council of the Year Awards. In case you're not familiar, I'll give you a quick snapshot. It says, "Good Jagar, little one, walk with me. I want to tell you our dreaming as elders told it to me." So in this book, Indigenous words are integrated seamlessly into the English text to create the bilingual cultural celebration. There's a glossary and a pronunciation guide, and this provides non-Indigenous readers the opportunity to learn some Gundjagara. Echidnas are the perfect choice for this slow journey of discovery, and the Australian life depicted visually is wonderfully realistic, and images provide a range of views to create a strong sense of place. So that was the CBCA endorsement of this book, which is called Our Dreaming by Curly Saunders. And Curly Saunders is a Gunai woman, and the illustrator, Dub Leffler, is a Bingumble man. And through this text, they explore a deep love and respect for country and all her spirits. So, given that I am situating my work in the literature strand, I need to not just assume that because I'm going to enjoy this book with the children that learning is going to happen. I need to be very intentional around which content descriptions within that literature strand will support the teaching if I'm using this book as my mentor text, my hero text. So my planning as a teacher, even though situated primarily in this literature space, will allow rich curriculum linking to the other strands. I want to set up dialogic talk protocols as well as do explicit teaching of writing for the sharing of ideas and the reflecting of experiences as similar and different to our own. So these foundation content descriptions in literature share ideas about stories, poems, and images in literature, reflecting on experiences that are similar or different to our own by engaging with text by First Nations Australian and wide-ranging Australian and world authors and illustrators. In terms of engaging with and responding to that literature, I want the children to be able to respond to stories and share feelings and thoughts about their events and characters. And then in the language strand, I want to be able to explore the contribution of images and words to meaning in stories and informative texts. So when I'm modeling the oral exploration of the images and the words and how they contribute to the meaning of this text, I'm expecting and will announce to the students throughout that that is what they should be doing in their own consumption of text. So this is taken from Storybox Library, which I hope you all know about. It is getting Curly Saunders there, who's the author. She reads the book, but before she reads the book, she talks about it and why she wrote it. And the idea of that for the children is that it helps them understand the link between the modes. So it understands that when we think about something and talk about something, we can write it down. And then when we write it down, we can read it back. It also situates our children in a community of authors because they can see themselves alongside somebody like Curly Saunders in enjoying this text. Back to the essential practices that I introduced earlier, it is highly motivating and engaging as a text. So that would be that essential practice number one. The text is culturally relevant and it's perfect for an interactive read aloud to do all of the explicit literacy teaching of the 3 content descriptions that I showed you on the previous slide. Now, it would be supportive of a lot more than that, but I'm remembering to keep a really strong boundary around what it is that I want to teach. And that way learning happens. So in terms of phonological awareness and the letter sound and sound letter relationships that we talked about in those essential practices, the Gundagara words provide a wonderful opportunity for children to practice pronunciation based on what we know and are learning about that alphabetic principle and which letter sound matches sound different in the Indigenous language presented in this story compared to the standard Australian English that we're learning about. And it is definitely supportive of deliberate vocabulary instruction. So you can see with the use of a text with heart, so our dreaming, and interrelating which content descriptors I really, really want to get across, you are doing intentional teaching. Now, this would be over a couple of weeks worth of work, but by coming up with that hero piece, you're hitting all of those markers very, very deliberately. So I wonder if you've got in your mind a text that would help you be a keystone and a hero piece. If you might think about looking at the strands of the Australian curriculum as language, literature, and literacy first, and then drilling down into the modes in which you will get the children to do some teaching and learning based on your essential instruction. I also would like you to think about those essential core red keystone practices that must be part of your literacy instruction in your classroom, which are not happening, which could be strengthened, and which are happening, and that you could really, really build upon for the sake of the children. So that concludes our work. I wonder whether you will use a full heart when choosing to teach with literature.
Thank you so
very
much,
much.
Bree. This has been really, really wonderful. And I thank you so much for really pulling together this fantastic example of showing us how literature can really be that hero that you describe. It's been really wonderful to see. I wanted to throw out for any questions from anybody, if anyone wanted to share which of those learning intentions were the most interesting to them or powerful to them. If we have any comments about the way that you structured your example, would love to hear them now. While people are typing, great comment that D. Maddock loves the terminology hero piece. I do too. I think it's a really great way to remember it. How did you start to see things this way? How did you start to sort of come at the curriculum from the approach of a hero piece?
So the idea is that I think we can fall into the trap when we read a Kara's plea and we see the design and the ideology of the curriculum being that it is so integrated. We can fall into the trap of just throwing our hands up and saying, oh, okay, so whatever I do will serve all of the purposes. And that to me is akin to kind of just throwing a bowl of spaghetti at the wall and hoping that something sticks. We need to be really boundaried and really disciplined about what it is that we want to teach the children. And therefore, we need to have a hero. So we need to start somewhere, and then using that hero is where we will be able to pull out the parts that make the most sense. Because don't forget, I said the curriculum is designed to be clear in ways that are integrated to the student. So it's all well and good that we understand that, but how are they understanding those links and how that will support them in other contexts in their literacy?
I'm just going to, just in case no one's looking at the chat, so there was a question about the website you referred to that Our Dreaming was presented on. That was Strawberry Box Library, right? We're big fans of them. I would love to hear, while we're here, because you are speaking at our conference in just over, well, a month and a day, right? I would love to hear if you would like to share a little bit about the session that you'll be presenting there and what we can expect from you at the conference.
Sure. So in a similar vein, so I will be, looking at using literature for what I'm calling productive planning of the Australian curriculum English. It's going to be more of a reflection actually on my doctoral studies. And that was a very intentional integration of the strands of the Australian curriculum. It was situated in a middle primary context, and I was using the explicit teaching of language. So I was using professional learning to enhance teachers' knowledge about language, and then where that is appropriated in text, and then dialogic pedagogies to support the teaching of text. So the idea was that, it was understanding where the links are, and then I'm going to present to you my actual intervention that I did with a group of teachers, and that then they took off and did with their middle primary students. So it'll be a research informed kind of reflection of my research project, but with this same theme of productive planning of using the Australian curriculum English. I'm
That
looking forward to
sounds
it.
fantastic. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it as well. And I'm really glad that you'll be bringing this perspective to the conference. So thank you so much. I am going to throw a question at you that I have not asked you to prepare for. So fair enough if you need to take a moment. But when we look at the stresses on time and resources that teachers have on them at the moment, what would you say is your one tip for effective teaching and planning right now when teachers feel stretched so thin all of the time? What would you suggest? What would help?
Yeah, that is a big question, Cassie. And also it's a very kind of relevant challenge that everybody's feeling. I suppose my just because this is relevant to this particular presentation, those essential practices I think are really supportive in understanding that, okay, if I'm planning for a week's worth of work, and we are looking at language and literacy here for these purposes, what is it that the absolute must-dos, and then filling the fluff in around those bones. So am I making an absolute effort that motivation and engagement and variance of text type and vocabulary instruction are part of my week this week? If I am doing that, which pedagogies is going to, how am I going to go about it? Where is it whole class? Where is it small group? Where do I need to see students individually? And then which resources are supporting that? So I really do think, it's productive in that there's a lot to get through. Nobody's denying how rich and all-encompassing the curriculum is. So it's about understanding that I know what a good teacher does, and then I might be doing sort of, if I decide those 10 essential practices are the 10 practices or thereabouts that I would like to embed into my planning, I might have 6 of them happening. Where are the other 4? And then how can I strengthen, my resourcing and my pedagogical decisions around those things? So I don't know if that feels less work. For me, it feels more achievable in terms of links being made, and then understanding that analogy of not being able to unscramble the egg. So you keep those essential first wave practices in, and then the idea is that less children need support in a more explicit and individualized way if you're doing that level of instruction first wave, first response.
Thank you so much for that. And I think sometimes you do have to think about the answer being like, well, we can't make more time, right? So how can we, it's the productive part of your session title, I think. How can you get the most out of what we do have? We have a great question here, which you might be able to shed some light on, which is, how long should a year 1 class work on a particular picture book before introducing another, do you think?
So that's a really good opportunity to reflect on that first point about motivation and engagement. We would never want to engage in reader side, which, is that idea that we would kill a book simply for the sake of teaching it. So interactive read alouds are supposed to be repeated. So if you were teaching a language element of a book, you could read it or an excerpt of it multiple times for different purposes. It could be enough that you use the book once if that's enough to get the teaching that you're doing across. So I think it's about not how many times, it's about what will maintain engagement and motivation, what will honor the author so that we don't, commit this read aside where we absolutely, ruin the book for the children, because that's not why they wrote the book in the first place. But also understanding that any book will have, any good book will have affordances around the teaching of language or the teaching of literature or the teaching of literacy. So it might be one book's enough for a couple of weeks. It might be 5 books by the same author are enough for a couple of weeks. It might be one book is enough, but you read the whole book on the first day. And then with small groups of children, you're pulling out excerpts or sentences, to do some explicit teaching, depending on what your focus is. So that's a very kind of unclear way to say it depends, but you as the teacher understand that it's about motivation, engagement, honoring the author, and then doing the teaching that book is supportive of.
Thank you so much. While we have everyone here, just before you all head off, I do just want to make a mention of this kind of conversation being really indicative of what the 2 days at the PETA 2023 conference are going to be like. We're going to be really focused on that deep engagement with literature, how we can use that to improve reading outcomes and student outcomes in English across the 3 strands, and obviously how literature also plays in across the curriculum. So if this level of conversation and thinking about an approach to a book, an approach to planning, if that's exciting to you, and I suspect it will be, it's a very exciting approach, I think. We would love to see you at the conference. It's October 20 and 21. So coming up very soon, we will be in person at the W Hotel in Flinders Lane in Melbourne. We've got about 20 spaces left, so if you'd like to join us, we would recommend booking quite quickly. But we do have an online access as well, where you can watch from anywhere at any time. You'll have 12-month access to those conference session recordings as well once the conference has ended, so you can really extend the learning that way. And those spaces are still available as well. And we also have whole school booking options if that's something that you're interested in. But if you'd like to know more about the conference, the website is petaconference.edu.au. We'll send it out to you. And if you have any questions, please just give us a call at any time, hop on our website, and we would love to talk through the program with you so that you can see that the sessions, just like this little preview, I guess, of Bree's, has been really informative and really inspiring, just this one session. So thank you so much. And we would love to see you all there. And thanks again, Bree. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon.